Hi, I'm Ben Willmore from mastersacademy.com, and I'm here at the Photoshop Virtual Summit teaching Advanced Selections and Masking. This is where I'm going to talk about how to remove the backgrounds on things like complex trees, or a glass of water, or fire, or trees with every little branch and leaf. And so let's jump in and get started so we can spend as much time as possible in Photoshop. First off, Photoshop has some features designed for making complex selections. Let's try one of them. Here I'd like to replace the sky that's here because it's rather boring. And so if I have the newest version of Photoshop, I can go to the Select menu and there's now a choice called Sky. And if the sky is blatantly obvious, kind of like it is here, I can choose that and hope to get an acceptable selection. Now, I would like to choose another picture to put behind this so that we can replace that sky because the selection itself won't be enough. So let's take this layer called background and I'm going to add a layer mask. So at the bottom of my layers panel, I'll click on the layer mask icon and that's going to make it so the area that's currently selected will become hidden. It'd be the exact opposite of what I want because right now the sky is selected. But if you want to hide the area that's selected, there's a trick. If you hold down the Option key, Alt in Windows, which I have held down right now, and then you click the layer mask icon, it will hide the area that was selected. Now, right now, let's look at the end result here. If I just glance at this end result, I can tell that this checkerboard area is where it's supposed to be transparent, but I can see some of the checkerboard showing through the tree. And it just doesn't look right in this area. Well, we've removed the background in this layer using a layer mask. And a layer mask is just a black and white image attached to a layer where areas that are black hide part of the image and areas that are white show part. Well, we can look at that layer mask. And you can do so by holding down the Option key, Alt in Windows, and you just click within this thumbnail of the layer mask in your layers panel. I'll do that. And in here, I can see why. I can see through the tree a little bit. Do you see right in here where you can see it's not white? So there's some tricks for fixing up masks like this one, especially ones that were automatically generated by a feature like the one we just used. And let me share with you that trick. If I were to grab the paintbrush tool, and up here in my options bar, I customize it. I'm going to set this up in a special mode that's called hard mix. And I'm also going to adjust my opacity setting, which I can do with the number keys on my keyboard. I'll bring it down to 20 or 30%. And then I'm going to get an okay size soft edge brush and I'm painting with white. So I'm ready to go. So what do I have? Foreground color is white. My blending mode of this brush is set to hard mix and the opacity set at 30. Now watch what happens when I paint. If I paint out here, nothing happens at all. The image is not changing at all. But if I paint on an area that is near white to begin with, then watch what happens. Whoa, did you see that? I just cleaned out that tree without getting overspray on the background. And I could do that in other areas of the background down here where I don't have to worry so much about if I got a little bit up into the sky. Any part of the tree where you see shades of gray where it should be white, you could paint on right now to try to clean it up. If it's a little too aggressive, choose undo and just lower your opacity. I'm at 30%. You could bring it down to 10 by typing the number 1 on your keyboard and then click on a few places to just do a slight cleanup, pushing things towards white. You can also switch your foreground color with this little double arrow icon just above your foreground and background colors. And if you do that, now you're going to force areas towards black and you're going to protect those areas that are close to white. So down here at the bottom, I see almost like a glowy look that's down here. Well, let's see if I can clean some of that up. I'll get a rather large brush. Remember, I'm painting with black and I'm going to get my opacity maybe up to 20% and then just paint across here. And you see how that kind of cleaned it up. In here, where the tree is, I also see a lot of shades of gray in between those branches where I think it should be closer to black. So I could grab this tool and, again, paint across there. Remember, I'm at 20% opacity to clean it up. But I think it would be best if I'm viewing this not as a mask, but viewing it on top of whatever sky I'd like to have in this picture. So I'm going to choose undo there to not do that to the tree quite yet. And let's go pick a sky. I'll use this one. I'm just going to select all, copy it, and then close it, because I got a bunch of documents open and I might kind of lose track of which one I need to work on if I don't do it that way. So I've copied it. I'm going to paste it in here. I don't want to paste it in the mask though, so I'm going to get out of viewing the layer mask. I'll do that by holding down the Option key, and that's Alt and Windows, and clicking on the layer mask in my Layers panel. Now I'm going to choose Paste. And then I'll put this on the layer that's underneath. And here we go. We have not a bad result. If you look at these trees in here, those look pretty clean to me. Looks pretty clean all the way up here. Not too bad. Not always going to look that clean, but this chance, I think it's looking pretty good. Now, if I wanted to, I could do that trick. I just need to make sure that I'm working on the layer mask itself. And right now I could paint with black. And if so, it's going to thin out the tree a little bit, because it's going to get rid of the little shades of gray that were found within that tree. And you'll see it becoming a little bit thinner branched. Choose undo to see before, and reapply if I want to. So that's one idea. We could use a feature that was found under the Select menu just called Sky that Adobe recently added to Photoshop. But let's close out this image and try to work on some where that particular thing is going to completely fail us. Well, here we have a blatant sky. I think it's pretty obvious where the sky is. So let's go to the Select menu and tell it to select the sky. Okay, I see a selection down here in the lower right. If you want to preview a selection, what you can do to get a good view of what's selected and what's not is you can type the letter Q on your keyboard. Q means Quick Mask Mode. And so I'm going to type that right now. And the areas covered in red are not selected. And that means the vast majority of the sky is not selected. And it's only this part down in here that looks like it's still blue, and that's the part that is selected. So I think it did an absolutely terrible job here. So I'm going to type Q once more to turn off Quick Mask Mode, and I'm actually going to go to the Select menu and choose Deselect to say let's skip that particular feature. And now let's see what other features we could use in this particular case. Well, I'm going to come over here to my Tool panel, and we're going to use the Eraser tool to erase the background in this image. Now you might think that would take quite a bit of time. Well, I'm just going to get a brush that is the largest brush I can possibly have. The largest is 5,000 pixels in size, and if you can see that brush, it's overhanging the top and bottom of this document. And all I'm going to do is come over here, and when I go to my Eraser tool, I'm going to click and hold down on it. There are 3 versions of the Eraser tool, and we want to use the Background Eraser, because aren't we trying to remove the background in this image? Now with that, there are some options up here at the top of our screen that we're going to need to change. There's one called Limits. And what that's going to do is make it so it can only delete things in one unbroken chunk, which means it would be able to delete what's constrained by these white lines and no further than one of those blue sky openings. I want to change that to discontiguous. Discontiguous means it can delete things. They don't have to be touching each other. It doesn't have to be one continuous chunk. All right, then I'm going to next just move my mouse until there's a little crosshair in the middle of it. I'm going to move it until that crosshair is definitely on an area of blue sky. I'll do it near the upper left of the image. If you can't see, it's where this hand tool is showing up. And now I'm just going to click and watch what happens. Well, it deleted a tiny little spot, and that's because when I switched between the normal eraser tool and the background eraser tool, my brush size went down to 13. I'm going to get the biggest brush size I can possibly have, and I'll probably also make the hardness come down a bit so that if it stops deleting, it's not abrupt. Okay, now let's try it. I have the crosshair near the upper left of my screen. It's touching an area that's blue, and I'm just going to click. Now what it just did is it looked for that particular color of blue and it deleted it from within my massive brush. And now all I need to do is let go of my mouse, move to another part of my screen where I can still see blue sky, like I'm up here near the top center of the document, and I'm going to click on that blue sky again. And again, it's going to look through the entirety of my brush for that color of blue, and it's going to delete it. Then I can see some blue over here still showing up, just a hint of it, like partially transparent. So I'm going to get over there, make sure the crosshair is right on whatever shade of blue I can see over there, and click. Then I'll let go and I'll move down near the bottom of the image where I can also see blue still showing up. I'll get the crosshair right on one of those blues and click again. And I'll just repeat that process wherever I can still see blue sky. All I'm doing is clicking and letting go. I'm not dragging when I have my mouse held down. And let's see, that's looking relatively good. Well, let's just see if it's been cleaned out. Let's put a color behind this to represent what, replace that checkerboard. So here I'll do a solid color layer, and I'll just choose maybe a reddish color, some color where it's obviously not found in the original picture, and I'll drag that layer so it's underneath the one we've been working on. All right, and you can see, looking through all those places, it looks like the blue sky is largely gone. But what I want to do is make it so, first off, this is not a permanent deletion. I want to be able to make further changes. And also, I think if I zoom up, I'm probably going to find a little hint of residue. Can you see a little hint of blue on the edges of some of these lines? I need to be able to fix those. So let's see how I can go about doing that. Well, what I'm going to do is convert this result into a layer mask. Now, the background eraser tool always deletes things. It never creates a layer mask, so we're going to have to work around it to get that. But there's a trick. If you go in your Layers panel and you move your mouse onto the little thumbnail preview for a layer, you can hold down the Command key, that's Control in Windows, and click on that little thumbnail image. And if you do, it's going to select all the areas that actually contain information. And it's not going to select the part that's empty. And so I just got a selection of this whole area. That's cool. But then I want to have the original picture in there instead of this version that's had the sky already removed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a layer mask. So at the bottom of my Layers panel, I'm going to click on the layer mask icon. Now I have my layer mask. And then I'm going to click over on the left side of that layer to make the image itself, instead of the mask, active. Now here's a trick. If you go to the Edit menu, you can choose Fill. And one of the things you can fill with is called History. And history usually fills with whatever this document contained when you first opened it. And that was the original image, including the sky. So watch my Layers panel. Look at that little layer thumbnail that's there, and now you can see the blue sky came back in. But you can't see the blue sky on the main screen because the layer mask is preventing it from showing up. All right, so now we've converted what the background eraser tool would usually do, and we've converted it into a layer mask. I can click on the layer mask, and if you want to look at it directly, remember you can hold down the Option key, Alt and Windows, and click on it. Here's my mask. It doesn't look too bad. It looks like I could have used the background eraser tool a little bit more down here, because this area where it used to have blue sky, the mask is not quite fully black. But remember, there was that trick where you can grab your paintbrush tool, and you probably still have it set up for hard mix mode at 20%. Well, if I do that and I paint with black, I bet you I can clean that up a bit if there's an area that's not fully masked out. And so if there's anything that looks like it needs to be cleaned up, maybe it just doesn't look solid black, feel free with that brush, normal brush tool set to hard mix, and at about 20% opacity, you can probably paint over those areas and clean them up a bit. Although if I was better with using my background eraser, I shouldn't need to. All right, let's stop viewing the mask. I'll hold down the Option key and I'll click on the mask again. to hide it. Now let's deal with the little color fringing that might be on the edges of this, where you can see a little hint of blue or something else, although I don't think it looks too bad. What I'm going to do to fix it though is I'm going to come up here to the Select menu and I'm going to choose Select and Mask. Just make sure the layer mask is active when you do. Then when I'm in Select and Mask, here it's showing me whatever settings I last had. And up here it all depends on what these settings are. What I might want to do actually before I come in here is either put that replacement sky in there or at least change this setting to on layers, because didn't we have a red layer underneath? Why don't we do that? I'll set it to on layers. All right, to clean up that edge, we have a few options. The first thing I want to do is give Photoshop control over just the littlest bit around that edge. And I do that with this area called Edge Detection. There's a setting called Radius, and I'm just going to bring it up to the lowest setting it goes to, other than 0, which is 1. That gives Photoshop control over a width of 1 pixel all the way around the edge of our selection. Then I'm going to come down near the bottom to this area called Output Settings. And I'm going to turn on this checkbox that's called Decontaminate Colors. And let's just turn it on. It takes it just a second to create a preview, and once it does, it should shift the color of what you see around the edges of this image. And most of the time it'll help unless you had a bad selection. It looks to me like over here my selection wasn't that good. You could actually see through some of these parts. So let me click cancel. Let's go back to our mask. That's a spot I should have cleaned up and didn't. So let's option click on the mask and look. Do you see how these areas that are supposed to represent this architecture are not fully white? Well, let's use the same trick we used before. We have the paintbrush tool. We have it set to hard mix mode at 20% opacity. We never set it back to normal. But this time I want to force things to white. So let's make sure our foreground color is white, and I can come in here now and paint, and sometimes I might have to paint more than once, but I should be able to, in general, clean those up. Any area where if I zoom out, I look, and the area where the architecture is, looks like it has a shade of gray on it. Well, this is going to prevent it from painting on any area that is black, so you're not going to get any contamination of that area where the sky would be, but I should be able to touch up those areas where I was seeing those shades of gray. That's what was making it not look so great when I was in the Refine Edge screen. So now I think I have those tied up. Let's option click on the mask once more to get out of that view, and then let's try that once more. I went to the Select menu and I choose Select and Mask. And what did I do? I brought the radius up to 1, and then I turned on a checkbox under here, under Output Settings, called Decontaminate Colors. And what that should do is if you were to zoom up on your picture, if you see any hint of blue or other colors around the edges of this, that's a hint of the old sky. And when I turn on Decontaminate Colors, it should generally clean it up. On occasion, I need to bring the radius up to 2 to give it a wider range of areas it can work on, but in general, it usually does a pretty good job. When you're done, you click OK, and you should end up with a brand new layer. It's a copy of the one you had before, and you'll be seeing your end result. Well, now I'm going to choose a sky to put in there. This one looks appropriate, so I'm going to just do Select All, Copy, and then I'll close this document. That way I just won't lose, because I got about 20 documents open here. I'll type Command V, which is paste. You could also go to the Edit menu to paste if you would rather. And now I just dragged that layer underneath so we can look at this with a new sky in it. So now let's look at another technique we could use. In this case, I have a simple blue sky, and I would like to replace it with a different one. So let's go get a different sky. I'll use this one. I'm just going to do the same process. Select all, copy, close, don't save, paste, and then drag it underneath. Now I can't put it underneath when we have a background layer because the background layer is locked. I'll just click on the lock symbol though, then I can drag it underneath. So I put the sky underneath ahead of time. Now let's work on the layer that's above, and let's just tell Photoshop to, why don't you go and select the sky. It's a pretty blatant sky, should do a great job And then let's add a layer mask. But remember, a layer mask is usually going to keep the area that's selected. And we just told it to select the sky. We don't want to keep the sky, we want to hide it. And there was a trick. That was when you add a layer mask, if you hold down the Option key and you click, it will hide the area you have selected. So in this case, that means hide the sky. Oh, that's terrible. It kept the little skydivers, but not the smoke that's there. Well, that's because that Select Sky feature is not always going to do a good job. And that's why we're going to look at these other techniques. So far, we've used the background eraser. Now let's try a different technique. I could try the background eraser on this one, and it might do okay. I can just click right here, and maybe click up here, and maybe click down there. Click on all these places to get the different blues that were in the original sky to go away, and I guess we could be done. Oops, I shouldn't have clicked that last time because that deleted a little too much. I'll just choose undo. There. So the background eraser would be great. If you didn't want it to be permanent, then you could convert it into a layer mask once again. But we're going to explore other ideas here. So now let's remove the background on this. What I want is I want to keep the shadow that's here. And I want to slide a new background underneath it. And I want to keep the shadow that's inside the glass part of the magnifying glass, and potentially that little highlight potentially as well, although I'm not sure if I'll keep the highlight. So let's go to the Select menu and first see if it can select the subject of this photograph. It'd be really nice if it could. That's not good enough. If I type the letter Q, that means Quick Mask, the areas covered in red are not selected. And if you look around the edge, it's just not clean enough. So in this case, I'm not going to show you the easy part. The easy part would be to select this object. You can use various selection tools to do so, but I have a selection I've made ahead of time just to save time. So I'm going to go to the Select menu, and I'm going to choose Load Selection. And I only have one stored in there, so if I just click OK, I have that. Now what I'm going to do is isolate the magnifying glass onto its own layer. I can do that by going to the Layer menu and choosing New Layer via Copy. If you watch my Layers panel, only the area that's selected will be copied to its own layer. So there it is. Next, I'm going to work on the layer that's underneath. And if I turn off that layer's eyeball, you can see what's on the layer above. Now, what I want to do on the layer below is I want to adjust it to get this entire area of paper to be white all the way around. I'm going to do that by using an adjustment called Levels. When I'm in Levels, the slider in the upper right forces areas to white. And there's a little hidden feature built in. If I hold down the Option key, Alt and Windows, I can click there, and then it will show me every area of the picture that's not white yet. Now I'm working on the layer underneath, and so this is not affecting the magnifying glass itself. That's why it looks normal. But I want to pull this over now, and it's showing me those areas right there that look white are truly white. Anything that doesn't look solid white is a shade of gray or a color. And so I'm going to bring this over until that white goes all the way around the image, but I'm going to try to find the least I can move it to get to that point. So I'm going to go to right about there. Now I might want to clean up something. Look in the lower right. Do you just see some specks there? I could continue to move this over until they're gone, but if they're only specks, I can just clean up with a paintbrush. Just paint with white. So I'm going to let go at this setting right here, click OK, and then grab my paintbrush, paint with white, and I just probably want to get it back to normal. Not hard mix at 20%, but normal at 100%. And down there was where those specks were, so I just painted over them to get rid of those. All right, so now I have what I want, which is this background all the way around here is solid white. And it's only where the shadow begins where it gets darker than white. Well, now what I want Photoshop to do is to give me a selection based on the brightness of this picture, where if an area is 100% white, it'll be 100% selected. If an area is 10% gray, it'll be 10% selected. If you get down to 80% gray, it'll be 80% selected. It will be a selection based on the brightness of this image. Fancy people like to call that a luminosity mask. Well, all we need to do is to go to a panel called Channels. And you don't have to know anything about channels. All you got to do is go to the topmost channel, put your mouse on top of the little thumbnail image for it, hold down the Command key on your keyboard if you're on a Mac, Control if you're on Windows, and click anywhere within that thumbnail image. That'll give you that selection I just described. But that selection is actually the exact opposite of what I want. What I really want is to have the shadow selected, not the background. So I can go to the Select menu and choose Inverse to get the opposite. Now I have my opposite. And if I wanted to, I could use a layer mask to mask that layer. The problem with that is in the areas that are shades of gray in here, it's going to be a mix of this background and the shadow put together. It's not going to be something that just darkens the picture. So what I'd prefer to do is actually totally replace that layer that's underneath. I'm just going to go to the bottom of my Layers panel, click on the Adjustment Layer icon, and choose Solid Color. And I'm going to choose black. Although it would have been better if I chose the color right out of the shadow that's in the image. You can still change it. You just hide this, and you probably want to grab your eyedropper tool up here. And I might just click on that darkest shadow that's in here because it's probably more brownish, and then change the color of this layer. You can double click on this layer to bring it up, but in order to change it to the color that I just clicked on, you'd have to go over here to your swatches. And this will show you the last color you had right there. I can choose it. But that's getting fancy. You don't have to go in that order. All you'd have to do is use the eyedropper, click on the shadow before you made this layer. All right, now I can throw away that layer that's underneath, and I now have a magnifying glass and a shadow. Now these are two different layers, so if I want to move them both, I can hold down the Shift key, click on that top layer so I have them both, and then let's use the Move tool. I'm just going to click within here so I can move this around, and I'm going to drag up here to the next tab. That's another document. And then before I let go, I'll drag my mouse into that document and then let go. I don't care if this shows up. Now I can move this around, and you can see that we do have the shadow inside the magnifying glass and in this area. So we have masked it. If I turn off the shadow, you can see the difference. And I could set that layer to multiply mode, which might make it look just a little bit better. There's without multiply, there's with. Or if I needed to use this like for a web graphic where you're not going to see this background, instead you're going to see it on a website, then what I could do instead is just create a new layer that I put underneath and then merge all these layers together into one. I just select them all and say Merge Layers. That completely removed it. There's no masks involved. We could save that out with a transparent background and be just fine. So that's a magnifying glass. Now let's try that with some other things. Let's do it with fire. That's right, we can remove the background on fire very similarly to what we did with magnifying glass. We're going to make a selection based on the brightness of the picture. You're only going to be able to capture fire and make it show up when it's dark out. The background will usually be really dark. And so let's go to our Channels panel. And that's where we ended up creating what's known as a Luminosity Mask, which is loading the brightness of your picture as if it was a selection, where the bright areas become selected and the dark areas are not. So in this case, if this area here was solid white, it'd be completely selected. If this area up here was solid black, it wouldn't be selected at all. And if this area was 50% brightness, it would be 50% selected. And I think that's going to work fine in general. But we're not limited to working on the normal brightness range of the picture, because here in the Channels panel, we have multiple versions. If you click on the little picture on the topmost channel, it won't change your view, but then if you click on the next one down, you'll see an alternative version you could use. And then click on the next one down, you'll see yet another one, next one down, another one. And you can see that they're quite different. If we were to use this one, we would only get the very brightest areas of the flame and everything else would be missing. If we go for the medium one, we get more of the flame, and the hot one, or the red one in this case, would give us even more. I kind of liken that medium one. So whichever one of these you'd like to use the brightness of, you can hold down the Command key, that's Control in Windows, and click on the little thumbnail picture for it, and you'll get a selection. Then I'm going to go up here to the topmost channel, and I'm going to click on its picture to get back to normal. Then I can go to Layers, and with Layers I can add a layer mask by clicking down here on the layer mask icon, and now we've removed the background on the flames. But if this background was not perfectly black, then some of it would still be showing up, and I think we have that down here at the bottom. If you actually look in the Layers panel, you can kind of see it. Do you see it's not black down here at the bottom? Because there was some light hitting the ground. So let's look at our layer mask. I'll hold down the Option key, Alt in Windows, and I'm going to click on the layer mask thumbnail in my Layers panel. Then let's adjust this. So I'll go to Image, Adjustments, Levels, and in there, there's an eyedropper full of black. Whatever you click on it will become black along with everything that was darker than what you clicked on. So I'm going to click on the brightest part of this ground that's here, and that should force it to black. All that really did was it pulled in this upper left slider. You could have pulled it in manually to do the same thing. And in fact, you can continue to adjust it if you need to. Then I'll click OK, and we no longer need to look at our layer mask, so I'm going to Option click on it once more. That's Alt clicking in Windows to hide it. And let's go put these flames on top of something else. So I'm going to grab my Move tool. I'm going to click within this image. I'm going to drag up to another picture, and then move my mouse down into that image before I let go. That's my wife Karen there. She's in Paris, and let's make it so she's doing a yoga pose with flames going around her. So I'm going to make these flames smaller. I should be able to do that by choosing Edit, Free Transform. And then I'll just grab one of these corners, pull on it, and then I can move it up here and decide how big do I think that should look. Probably make it a little bit smaller still. And I'm thinking about that big. But then what I'd like to do is I'll press Return or Enter. I'd like to separate these flames into two separate layers so I can move the one on the right over to the left. To accomplish that, there's many different ways I could do it, but I'm going to select the one on the left with a basic selection, and I'm going to choose Layer, New, Layer via Cut. That means remove that part off of the layer it's currently on and put it on a brand new layer. But when I do that, if you look in the Layers panel, it didn't do anything with the layer mask. I wish it would have copied it too and put it up there. You could just click on the layer mask and drag it up there, but then it doesn't stay down here. If you want to get it on both layers, just hold down the Option key, Alt in Windows, while you drag it between layers. That means move a copy. So now I have this on two separate layers. And as long as I'm working on that layer that contains the one on the right here, I can now drag it over. Let's put it about there. Then let's see if we can get Karen so it doesn't look like the fire's behind her. I want it to look like it's going around her. So let's hide these two layers and work on what's underneath, and let's ask Photoshop to select the subject of this photograph. It's probably not going to do perfect, but it did okay around Karen. So now I want to use that selection to limit where these two layers with flames in them show up. If I want one mask to control where two layers show up, what I need to do is select both layers. I held Shift and I clicked on the other layer, and then put it in a folder. So as long as I have both of those layers selected, they're active, I can do that, and now I can add a layer mask to that folder. The only thing is that layer mask, or that selection I have, currently has Karen selected, and that's not what I want to have visible when it comes to the flames. I want the exact opposite. And there's a trick I showed you before, and that was to hold down the Option key, Alt in Windows, when you click the layer mask to hide what's selected. That's going to hide where Karen is from where the flames are. Now let's work on that mask and just refine it. Because it wasn't a perfect selection, I'll just grab my paintbrush tool. I'll make sure my brush is no longer in hard mix, instead it's in normal and 100%. And I'm going to get a small brush, and I'll probably get the edge to be relatively hard edged. I'm using my keyboard, but you could click up here and just set it to a hardness of 75, and it's small. And I'm going to make sure I'm painting with black. because black hides things, and I'm going to hide it off of Karen's arms. Just got to be a little bit more careful than I was there. And let's get it off of this whole upper area like that. Maybe get rid of that little flame over there. And then I'm going to move down. And down here, I'm going to have this so it looks like it's going in behind her leg. And that means I want the flame to be visible here. To make it visible, you paint with white. So I'll bring that in. So it looks like it's in front of her there. I'll paint with white over here to make it look like it's in front as well. And then I want it to look like it's behind her there. That means paint with black. Black will hide things. And I'll just kind of get rid of it where I should look as if it's behind her. All right, I think that's good enough for the amount of time we've had invested. Now we have flames, and Karen's doing yoga inside of them in Paris. Cool. Why don't we move the background on some glass? Now, if you're going to use glass, you don't want to use an image that would look like this one. Why? Because if you look at the colors that are in the background, they're pretty much identical to what's found in the glass and in the ice cubes that are here, so it's not going to be any easy process to separate the glass from the background. I'll get rid of that. All you want to do is make sure the background is a different color. And it doesn't have to be, like just a studio background. Like this would be fine. Here we got blue behind it. That could work. But I'm going to do this one because I think it'll be the easiest one to understand the process. And if you want to try in the same image, what I did to find this image is I went to stock.adobe.com. That's stock.adobe.com. And you can set this little menu over here to free. And I searched for the word glass. And that, if I looked through the results enough, I was able to find this image. So I didn't have to shoot anything. All right, first, let's see if we can isolate the glass itself. I'll go to the select menu and just tell it to select my subject. Now, I doubt that selection is very good because on the left side I can see it doesn't look all that great. I'm going to type the letter Q to get a preview of my selection. Remember, black means not selected. Then I can modify this by grabbing my paintbrush tool, and I'm going to paint with white. I'm just going to come in here with a real small brush, and if I click in one spot, I can hold Shift and click on another to make a straight line. So if I need to get right up the side of that glass where it should be straight, I might need to use that trick of click in one spot, hold Shift, and click somewhere else. And I'm going to do that just to clean up the edges of this selection because it's not that accurate. And I might need to do it up here in the upper right. And I mean, you can feel free to do better than I'm doing because I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time because this isn't the hard part. The hard part is making it so you can see through this glass vessel. And that's the part I want to spend time on. All right, I'm going to call that good enough. I'll type the letter Q to get out of quick mask mode. And just so we can get to that selection again in the future, I'm going to say save selection. And I'll just call it glass. Click OK. Then I don't need the selection at the moment, so let's choose deselect. And let's attempt to isolate just the highlights that are there. To do so, I'm going to go to the select menu and I'm going to choose color range. Now it's going to remember whatever the last settings were that I used, and I'm going to set this to none at the bottom because that's what you would get if you've never used this before. Then over on the right side there are some eyedroppers. I'm going to start with the eyedropper on the left, and I'm just going to click on the brightest highlight that's in the glass. Then I'm going to grab the eyedropper that's in the middle, the one with the plus sign, and if there are any other highlights that are not quite as bright as the one I just clicked on, but you can't see blue through them, like right up here on the rim of the glass, I think right up here would be a candidate, I'll click there as well. Then I need to change the preview so we can see how much of the image we're going to keep. So I'm going to change this menu at the bottom to a choice that is called black matte. Then I can move a choice called fuzziness all the way down, and this represents the colors we have clicked on with those eyedroppers. And if I bring up fuzziness, it can deviate from them and get a wider range. And I'm going to bring that up and see how much I need in order to make it look like that glass is starting to sit there, where I can get that whole rim maybe up to about there where the rim just starts showing up. And I'll click OK. Now I'm going to add a layer mask, so that's the only part of this that we're going to keep. But before I do, I'm going to duplicate the layer because we're going to need more than one of these. This is for the highlights. We're going to do a separate one for the shadows. So let's drag this down to the new layer icon. I can hide the one we just duplicated. And let's add a layer mask. So now I'm getting just the highlights, but I got parts of the sky that are out here. Let's get rid of that. I'm going to go over here and load the selection we saved earlier. Remember, it was called Sky? Click OK, and I have that selection. I want to select the opposite of it. Come over here and choose Inverse to do so. Now I have the background. And in my mask, I'm going to fill that with black. So let's go to Edit. Let's choose Fill. And one of the choices in here is to fill with black. So now we have just those highlights, but I can see hints of blue. I want to get rid of the hints of blue. So let's go up to the Select menu and choose Select and Mask. And in Select and Mask, let's turn on a checkbox at the bottom called Decontaminate Colors. Decontaminate Colors is going to look at the partially transparent areas, and it's going to try to pull the color out. So I'm going to click OK, and now we don't really have much of that blue left. Now we're going to do a second pass, and on the second pass we're going to try to get just the shadows. So I'm going to go back to the original image that's here. I'm going to turn on its eyeball, and I'm going to return up here to Select and choose Color Range once again. Then I'll repeat the process. I got to change my preview to none so I can see what I'm doing. And I grab this eyedropper, and this time instead of clicking on the brightest highlight, I'm going to click on the darkest shadow, which I think is down here in the reflection. I'll then grab the middle eyedropper and look for other things that look like shadows where I can't see the blue background showing through. That would be like up here and potentially right there. And then I'm going to change my preview. Since we're going for dark stuff, I'm going to put it on a light background by choosing White Matte. And then I'm going to adjust fuzziness and see how high do I want to go in trying to get those shadows. I'm going to go to about there. Click OK. Then let's add a layer mask so we only keep those areas we had selected. But that also includes some of that sky. So let's get our original selection of our glass back. I'm going to come up here and choose Load Selection. And remember, I saved mine as a choice called Glass. I'll click OK, and then I want the opposite of that to get the sky. So let's inverse, and then fill with black. All we're doing is filling the mask with black, and that hides things. Finally, you can see blue within there, so let's clean it up. Same way we did with the other layer. We come up here to Select and Mask, and we turn on a checkbox called Decontaminate Colors, which should attempt to pull out the color. And click OK. Each time you use Decontaminate Colors, it always duplicates the layer, so you're going to find you have twice as many layers as you need. I'll throw away those extras because I really don't need them. Now we have a glass that we can see through, and it's being defined by the bright highlights and the dark shadows, but everything else you can see right through. The key that makes this work is what was behind the glass was different in color than the glass itself. And so that's what made it work. So I hope that gives you a sense for how I do advanced selections and masking. Now, if you don't want to stop learning now, instead you'd like to continue learning from me on a regular basis, just know that I put out a free Photoshop tip on my private Facebook group, which is free to get into, and you see the web address here. I also put out a free full-length video similar to the one you're watching now each month at this other web address. But I hope you've enjoyed the Photoshop Virtual Summit. I'm Ben Willmore from mastersacademy.com.